let's jump into then polycomputing and the main paper we're going to be discussing, and I might screen share a little bit in a moment, but it's called There's Plenty of Room Right Here, Biological Systems as Evolved, Overloaded, Multi-Scale Machines. You wrote this paper with Joshua Bungard.
Mhm.
And I mean, before I touched this paper, I had no conception of polycomputing at all. So I think it'd be awesome for the audience if, can you explain what polycomputing is and how it differs from what we generally think of as traditional computing?
Sure. And so I should say this work was all 50-50 developed with Josh Bongard. Josh, of course, is a professor at University of Vermont. He and I are partners in a lot of different things, including all of the Xenobot work. And I think the reason you wouldn't have seen it is, to my knowledge, that we this is a term that we sort of coined and used for the first time. So the idea is this. And this crops up again. This will crop up again and again when we talk about the TAME framework and all of that. And it has to do with the primacy of observers and kind of an observer-centered view of things. So you can start thinking about it this way. What is a computation? What do we mean when we say something is a computation? And in particular, I've been at conferences where we spend days arguing about what that is, and some people say everything is a computation, and there was even one person who said nothing is a computation, and he was a professor of computer science. I thought that was amazing.
Interesting.
So there's all kinds of views, but one of the real kind of issues here is that there's this general feeling that there is a truth of the matter about it. So in other words, something either is or isn't a computation, and the idea is that we could come up with a definition, and then things would either meet that definition or not, and then we would know this particular thing. The trees waving in the wind, are they computing? There would be some definition that would say yes they are, or no they're not, and that would be that. The part of this belongs squarely in line with the TAME framework. The part of this that we're going to change is this idea that there is one unique answer to this question. And what we're going to say is that it is actually dependent on some external observer who views a set of physical events as a computation and benefits thereby. So the idea is that the computation is really in the mind of the observer or multiple observers more than it is a feature of some particular set of physical events. And so on the one hand, it makes things quite relative because it means that there could be multiple observers that look at the exact same set of physical interactions, see different things being computed, interpret them in different ways. And Josh actually and his student Atusa have some absolutely beautiful published work on this, looking at the exact same set of the exact same piece of physics and seeing multiple different computations in it. So this is actually, there's actually research on this now. But so it is relative in that sense because multiple observers could disagree about what the computation is here. But it isn't anything goes because there's a clear, it's not that anything you might say about it is equally valid as anything else. It's not that, because in treating it as a computation, you have to say, what does it enable you to do that you couldn't do otherwise? In other words, you have to benefit from that lens of looking at this set of, if you're going to treat a set of events as some kind of computation, you have to be able to say, what is the practical import? How did you benefit by having that? And the title of the paper is how we get into the biology of this, which is that, Feynman had this very, very famous work talking about there's plenty of room at the bottom. And what he was saying is that we build machines at certain scales, but underneath that, at the nanoscale, there's all this room for novel robotics and novel, new engineering that we're not using yet. There's plenty of room down there. Yeah. Well, the thing is, in biology, that's not the case because every scale is occupied. If you look at a cell, there isn't room anywhere because at every scale, from the let's say organism level down, anywhere you look, biology is already using it. It's already doing stuff at that scale, all the way down to the submolecular interactions. So that brings up an interesting question for biological evolution. If you were trying to add new functionality to a system, where would you put it? Because there isn't new room for it, and specifically, if you start making changes, let's say mutations, one of the problems is that you had a pretty well orchestrated system before. You start making changes, yes, maybe something new will appear, but you're going to wreck all your prior gains, right? All the subsystems that depend on a given system to work in a certain way, you can't just randomly make changes to it because everything else will fall apart. So that brings up an important puzzle. It's like how would evolution provide new functionality? And so what Josh and I propose in this paper is that one of the things evolution does is not just change the hardware, but it also provides new observers and new capabilities that extract more benefit from the exact same piece of hardware activity by viewing them in different ways. It's the perspective that can change. So you don't change the machine, you add different ways to interpret what that machine is doing, and thereby benefit and get adaptive increases in adaptive fitness. So this is and I have some other biological examples if you want them, but that's the idea. The idea of polycomputing is that any set of events could be said to be doing many different computational things at the same time, depending on who's observing them and how do they interpret what's going on. This idea that there are multiple different ways to interpret events in the organism is quite old. That idea has been sort of suggested by many different traditions. And of course, people have been wrestling with this question of what exactly is a computation for a really long time. But I think this particular fusion of it and the insistence on an observer point of view when understanding these biological and computational things, I think that's new. That emphasis of it, and it also connects to a very old debate which has to do with reductionism and causal power in systems. So let's just think about it this way. Imagine a traditional physicist looks at a microprocessor doing its thing. And so the physicist looks at it, and if that physicist is a reductionist, what he will say is, what computer, what algorithm? There are electrons moving around. None of the electrons disobey Maxwell's equations and Schrodinger's equations, whatever else is going on at the microscale. We have good equations that describe what the electrons are doing. That's it. Anything else you put on top of that is fiction. So the important stuff is guided. We know the equations that guide what we can say. And in fact, in a perfect world, if we had kind of a Laplacian demon thing going on, we could actually say what this machine is going to do just by tracking the microstates, where all the electrons are going. So the thing is that that perspective, it's not wrong in the sense that empirically, yes, we have equations that guide all these things, but would you hire that person for your new software company? I'm going to say you wouldn't, because anybody that doesn't believe that the algorithm is what makes the electrons dance it's not that they're factually wrong, but they're not going to make anything new. They're not they're not going to write any new algorithms if you don't fundamentally believe that there is such a thing as an algorithm that has causal power that determines what happens next. You can't participate in this whole stack of what happens afterwards. On the other hand, your traditional programmer is going to say, well, what I do is I write code that makes the computer do things. The algorithm is in fact functionally potent. It makes the right, and so that's a different lens. That's a different lens on it. And so what we're not going to do is argue about who's objectively right. We're just going to say that in different circumstances, you can gain different benefits from both views. And there's plenty of benefit to be gained from the kind of lens where you see what's going on in that microprocessor as a computation, because you can write code and you can do other interesting things. It's a view that steps away from prediction. Up until prediction is a real kind of a common thing that everybody latches onto. So whether you're a reductionist or not, the idea is, can you predict what the system is going to do next? And that's fine. But I think something much more interesting than prediction. See, prediction is all good when somebody else has already set up the system for you. So somebody else sets up the system, and now we're predicting. And now, can you predict it, or who's got the better way of predicting? But I think prediction is just part of the story. What we're really interested in is maybe I don't know what a good word for it is. Maybe it's pre-invention or something. It's the idea that we're not just going to predict exactly what this clever system is going to do next. We actually need to be in a place to make one, and the next one, and the one after that. And so now I'm interested in frameworks that facilitate that. I don't want to just be able to say, somebody hands you a complicated thing and now here's how we know what it does next. I want to know how we get to the next one, and what kind of worldviews and what kind of lenses make it easier to facilitate invention, basically facilitate discovery.
Mm.
And so that's how all this fits together is this idea that it really is fundamental to being an observer to say, what is your interpretation? What is your lens through which you interpret a series of signals, of events, and then what does that do for you?
The definition of one of the simplest definitions for polycomputing is the ability of the same substrate to simultaneously compute different things. And you're saying it's via different lenses, via different reference frames.
Yeah. I mean, that definition, it's funny that definition still really puts the center of gravity onto the computing thing itself.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to sort of blow it out and say,
Yeah.
that's not where the magic is. The magic happens around it at the various observers that exist or could exist that will interpret what's going on in various ways. That's really a critical part of the whole thing.
Gotcha. And I think it'd be really helpful if, could you provide a couple of examples? There's a great table in the paper that I'll probably overlay for part of the discussion, just so people can see it's about 20 different instances of poly computations in the same biological hardware. But could you, maybe tell us like one or two of your favorite examples?
Sure. Yeah. So one example is, and this is work that was done by a couple of postdocs in my group, Sarama Biswas and Wesley Clausen. Imagine a gene regulatory network model. So this is literally just a set of nodes. Maybe there's a dozen of them or so, maybe a little more, maybe a little less. They all correspond to different genes or different proteins. And one of the things they can do is turn each other on and off. So you can imagine this sort of graph thing where each node has like a little arrow and it either upregulates or downregulates one of the others, and they're all sort of connected. And this is like network. Okay, so these things are functional in every cell of the body. They work in they're critical in evolution, they're critical in health and disease and embryonic development and so on. And so it's really important to understand how these things function and what they do. And so if you look at it, at these models, they look like a really kind of a paradigm case of a deterministic, simple mechanical thing. I mean, they're completely deterministic. There's no magic there. You can see exactly what's happening. Each one is up or down regulating some other, and there's a set of models to sort of model its behavior. There are ordinary differential equations, or some of these are Boolean networks and so on. And so it looks really simple. And so if you were just to look at it and you would say, well, how much intelligence does this thing have? You would say, well, that's a silly question. It's a clockwork. So what we're going to do, we're going to use, and so the traditional way of looking at these things is to use the tools of dynamical systems theory and to just treat this thing as a completely mechanical process. So that's one lens, and that's one way of looking at it. And so what that lens does is to say that if you want this thing to behave in a particular way, meaning, let's say, to go from disease state to a healthy state, you're going to have to rewire it somehow, meaning you might add nodes or subtract nodes or change the weights or something like that. You're going to interact with the hardware. And this is what modern molecular medicine does. It would be gene therapy. You would have to add new, let's say if it was a gene regulatory network, you'd add a new gene that hits the promoter of some other gene, or, you'd change the promoters to be stronger or weaker, something like that. So we took a different approach. And again, this will come back with a vengeance when we look at the Tame paper, which is this idea that you actually don't know how intelligent and what the capabilities of this thing is until you try. In other words, it's not the idea is that you can't have these sort of philosophical feelings about where something is on that spectrum of cognition that we'll talk about. You actually have to do experiments. You have to state hypotheses and do experiments. And so our hypothesis was this: we said, let's test the idea that it has learning capacity. And so the way you do that is you basically treat it as if it were an entire animal and you try to train it.